Hi, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining us for this latest Rootwurks webinar. What does it take to implement a HACCP plan? My name is Ben Hartman. I'm the content manager here at Rootwurks, and I'll be your host for this webinar today. So, as you all know, in the food manufacturing world, issues like safety, compliance, and risk management are all very important. And one of the main tools that, for many years, companies have used to handle these issues is a series of guidelines known as Hazard Analysis Critical Control Points, or HACCP for short. But what does that actually entail? How do you implement these guidelines? And what are some of the tips you can use? That's all what, or some of the tools you can use. So that's what we're going to handle in this webinar. And we've got two experts here to help make sense of it all. So let's go ahead and introduce them both. First off, we have Kathy Knutson, PhD. Hi, Kathy. Kathy is a certified HACCP trainer with more than 15 years of full-time teaching experience and decades of workshop training in the US and internationally. In 2023, she was recognized by the Food Safety Preventative Controls Alliance as one of the top 10 instructors for FDA mandated PCQIs. Hi, Kathy. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Ben. Hi, Chase. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Happy to have you. Also with us today is Rootwurks CEO and founder Chase Eastman. Chase has more than 15 years in content development, e-commerce, social media, and multi-channel go-to-market strategy, and spent more than a decade in senior roles at one of the world's largest food industry training companies. Hi, Chase. Great to have you with us.
Hello, sir. It's a pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. So I thought before we get too deep into it, here's the agenda, by the way, some of the things we're going to talk about, just so you know what to expect. There's not too many surprises. Kathy, I thought you could give us a quick overview of what HACCP is for somebody who's maybe not the uninitiated.
Yeah, absolutely. And you already did the acronym, Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points. And what HACCP is a quality management program, and it rests upon the shoulders of good manufacturing practices, GMPs. And with that, what is the difference between GMPs and HACCP? And that is HACCP identifies those points within a facility, critical control points, where there is greatest risk to the product. And that risk is going to evaluate biological, chemical, or physical hazards. And then the facility is going to implement procedures to control those risks. And using a risk matrix, working with a team, all of that is really critical in terms of developing a HACCP plan and your HACCP implementation that is going to circle back and control those hazards. When I think about HACCP, I think about learning Stephen Covey's 7 Habits for Highly Effective People and First Things First. And with that principle of first things first, in HACCP, we pull out those major points within a facility where there is a control of a hazard. And also when you think about HACCP, I want you to just think about within the 4 walls of a facility. And so it starts at receiving and finishes at shipping in that facility.
And if I'm not mistaken, it's about having a preventative approach as opposed to like a responsive, a reaction one.
Absolutely. Everything we're doing in the food industry now is risk-based, preventative. We don't want people to be in the position, especially people who are watching this and are learners. We don't want you to be in the position that you're putting out fires, you're running around, you don't know what to do. All of this is thinking through the control of hazards and having that plan.
That makes perfect sense. So Chase, what about in terms of management? If you give, I guess, the perspective of in a facility, in a workplace, what role does management have in getting a HACCP plan going?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in a lot of ways, everything starts with management's commitment to a HACCP program and your food safety system, really. So you'll hear us kind of talk about HACCP. HACCP's one journey, as Kathy touched on, to preventive controls, FSMA, especially if you're in an FDA regulated facility. And so when you get into those things like preventive controls, and you start with critical control points and then go into preventive controls, that really can't go anywhere without leadership being fully supportive in what it really takes to build the culture necessary. And so, I could speak out of both sides of my mouth and then go, it also starts with your team and is a ground up approach, because as Kathy said, doing things in order is really important. And so there is some parallel paths that can happen, but it really starts with setting the tone and being consistent with that tone to really drive the appropriate culture to have a really safe facility. And at the end of the day, this is going to sound slightly dramatic, but this is really about saving lives. It's about saving your customers' lives, because as Kathy can attest to, the stuff that can go wrong when you're talking about human food, when it goes wrong, it can go really, really wrong. And nobody wants that hanging over their head. And so leadership plays a significant role in setting that culture to where, you're not coming down on your employees for self-reporting things and being proactive and identifying things. And we'll get into stuff like HACCP team a little later, right? But leadership is a big part of that, and empowering your team members to help drive the appropriate culture is a significant role for leadership. If you're a CEO or a president or a head of operations, just remember, it all starts and stops with you. You set the tone for your team, and then empower that team to go execute your vision and to build safe, manufacture safe products.
Absolutely.
And there's two things I want to springboard off of that, Chase, that legally the person who's in charge of the facility is in charge of food safety. So it really does start at the top, and that person has that responsibility and accountability, and there's a legal responsibility as well. And as Chase was talking about, setting the tone for food safety culture goes all the way to the top and then down again. And the second thing is, in the food industry, which is where I come from, the food industry in the past, decades past, really looked at quality assurance as just costing money. And that has flipped now. We look at quality assurance in terms of management of HACCP, HACCP coordinator, the HACCP team. We look at them as saving the company money. The average cost of a recall in the United States is $10 million. So anything that someone in the food industry is looking to implement is just a drop in the bucket compared to what could potentially happen if there is loss of control, if there's a hazard in the product and the company actually has to go through that recall. And so we want to be in that mindset that we're not spending money, we're not just seeing money go out the door, we're actually saving the company money.
So let's say, Kathy, everybody's on board, management's on board, everybody realizes that this is, potentially something that can save lives or save, at the very least, a lot of money. What are these first steps for implementing HACCP?
Yeah, the first steps in HACCP are what we call the preliminary steps, and they are so important. It's a little interesting on the FDA side in that FDA does not require these preliminary steps. But what we say in food safety is that if you don't go through these preliminary steps, at some point you'll have to. So just get your team seated and go through this. And that's going to include the assembling of that HACCP team. And you will have a HACCP coordinator who kind of leads everybody, but it's definitely teamwork. And then we look at product description. And with product description, I work in the cannabis industry as well. And when we're talking about HACCP, it can be applied food industry, dietary supplement industry, cannabis infused edibles, and really seed to sale in the cannabis industry, alcohol industry. See a lot of people in the alcohol industry getting trained, restaurants also. So there's this huge application of HACCP. And especially in the cannabis industry, getting back to answering your question, Ben. But we see with a lot of our cannabis companies is that they don't really know what they're asking for. Like they'll start a company, or maybe they already have a cannabis company, but now they're going to make cannabis infused edibles. And you ask them, okay, well, what are you going to make? And so within that category, there's all kinds of different choices. And let's say they do baked goods. Then there's all different kinds of choices within baked goods. And so getting back to that preliminary step of the product description, that is where we can apply Covey's habit of begin with the end in mind. Know exactly the description of your product, what you have, what you're manufacturing, your production line, your equipment. So very, very important to do that product description and really know what you're dealing with in terms of food safety. And then to the flow diagram, making sure that that flow diagram is accurate to the production within that facility. And then the step that is most commonly not done, super, super important, is process description. And that process description springboards off of your flow diagram. And that's where you will find the details. What kind of temperature is required? What kind of time is required? Those kinds of details go into that process description. And then our first HACCP step, the first step in HACCP is hazard analysis. So I'm going to pause right there. We'll get back to hazard analysis.
That's right. So what would you say to somebody who's maybe it all seems sort of big, like it's a lot to implement. I guess kind of some tips that you've seen people use maybe to make it a little easier, or not to cut corners or anything, but to make it so it's not, I guess, so daunting.
Was that to me?
Yeah, sorry, Kathy. Yeah.
Continuing on here. Yeah. So it's actually very overwhelming. And so all of us are here to help people through this process. And many times a HACCP team can do this on their own, or if they're part of a corporate structure, they can bring in corporate expertise. But looking at examples, of course, getting the training, looking at examples of HACCP plans as models of HACCP plans, not that you're going to steal it and not write your own. It's absolutely critical that every facility write their own HACCP plan, because at that facility, there is a unique blueprint, even if it's all the same equipment, the way that it's laid out. And then getting back to what Chase was talking about, the culture. So I have been in two separate companies or two separate facilities for the same company, and you just feel a different culture. And anybody who's working in any of those industries that I mentioned, you know what I'm talking about. In terms of the best type of culture being that family atmosphere, everybody's there doing the best they can to produce that safe product.
Yeah, I think something you mentioned earlier, Chase, about training. So let's say you've got like the plan that's really well devised, and the resources and the leadership are there. But how important is it to make sure that people are trained to actually do it, like to know what they're actually supposed to do, not just that they have something plastered up on the wall, that they know they know how to do it.
Training.
Yeah, I feel like I'm gonna be dramatic with this and say it's everything. I mean, it's vital. Like it. One, it's part of the regulations, right? You have to have a training program for your staff. They have to know what they're doing, right? One of the most important things so when you talk about compliance, people define it differently, right? The way that we view compliance, and that in the 15 plus years of working in in food safety and training is that, we define compliance as your people are doing what they're supposed to be doing when they're supposed to be doing it and have access to the information they need to do it correctly. Sounds simple, but way easier said than done, but it is that simple, right? It's way less about document management than people realize. Like with recalls, don't get me wrong, there's document management requirements, but I've been with internal auditors and worked with a ton of them. If they walk your facility and all your people are doing what they're supposed to be doing and everything with your facility buttoned up, they don't dig into documentation as much. They don't dig into your procedures because it doesn't really matter what's on paper. It's what your people are doing. Conversely, if you have the best SOPs and you have the best food safety plan documented and you show that to them, and then you go walk your facility and none of your staff are doing things as you've outlined in your SOPs or how you've outlined in your food safety system, you're not compliant. So to your point and to answer your question, Ben, I come from a training background, but in a lot of ways it begins and ends there, right? If your people are not doing things correctly, you're not compliant. It doesn't matter if your food safety system or your food safety plan is perfect. If people aren't executing it perfectly, you're not compliant. So training's a huge thing. And then touching on, and then the extension of training, right? And this touches on what Kathy was talking about with culture, reinforcement, consistent reinforcement, consistency in how your leadership expects things to be done and how you hold your organization accountable. And again, I know I've said it a bunch, and how you empower your people. It just begins and ends with training and reinforcement. And then jumping to a previous comment in question that Kathy said about where do we start? Do not be afraid of consultants and experts that can come in and help you. One of the best practices that, again, we're talking HACCP today, but HACCP extends towards GFSI, right? Global Food Safety Initiative and your schemas. Best practice that's even written into the regulations as best practice is leverage third-party reviews. Have a subject matter expert and a consultant with years of experience do a third-party review of your food safety plan and give you feedback. Have them come on site and give you a gap analysis. One of my favorite expressions is you ask the fish, how's the water? And they say, what water? Right? And what I mean by that is we get blind to things that we see and live in on a daily basis. So it's really helpful to bring in third-party folks that have fresh eyes and can see things that you might have looked past because you walk past it 1,000 times a month. You don't even see it anymore, right? And so bringing in those fresh eyes can be extraordinarily valuable to building the right kind of plan for your system, for your facility. Because as Kathy said, there's so many environmental factors that influence how you should build your food safety plan that is completely different from facility to facility. Even within an organization, if you have more than one facilities, right? You have more than one facility, you're going to need two different HACCP plans for those facilities, even if they're making the same product, because the environmental influences of those facilities are going to be different. And so, again, just don't, as Kathy said, leverage experts, bring them in to help you, especially if you're just getting started and you're not staffed with dedicated compliance folks. That's okay. That's where the experts come in, and then your team carries the responsibility collectively. And that's a very effective way to do it as well.
Yeah, and I'd like to talk a little bit more about the team with that preliminary step of assembling the team. What I have sometimes seen in industry is that team will be comprised of quality assurance folks. So you'll have your quality assurance director, manager, supervisors, technicians, and at first glance that looks appropriate, but that's not what you want. You want a diversified team to include someone from sanitation, someone from maintenance, someone from operations because they know the equipment, and then that quality assurance person. So that gets you up to 4 people. And especially if you have sanitation on a different shift, now that we're post-pandemic, you want to get all those people in the same room at the same time. So then you're looking at scheduling implications for that, and either people coming in early so that that sanitation person doesn't have to stay too late, or however it works out. They each bring a different perspective. They have a different expertise, and all of that is needed on your HACCP plan. There will be times when you're talking about the equipment, or you're talking about maintenance, or you're talking about sanitation. For example, sanitation for the control of allergens, as you go from one batch that has an allergen to another batch that doesn't have that allergen. The key sanitation information is absolutely required to help you with the control of hazards. And then, Ben, I see that there's a question from Connie. Can I go ahead and address?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, the question is, speaking of training, how often do employees need HACCP training, and is everyone required to be certified in HACCP? So the general answer, first of all, is that as far as I know, there may be exceptions out there, but as far as I know, there is no requirement to redo HACCP training. However, I would highly encourage everyone who's gone through HACCP training at some frequency, go through the course again, or go through a refresher course. And I would say like every 3 to 5 years, because science changes, regulations change, the certification schemes change, and you just want to stay on top of that. So going through that refresher is really important. And it kind of speaks to, for example, with the HACCP coordinator, who's kind of the HACCP lead, that very often in our companies, that person can feel very isolated. And as Chase was talking about bringing in consultants, you want to have your network of food safety people. I call us food safety geeks. And so we whenever food safety geeks get together, we say that food safety is not competitive. We are all in this together, and getting those resources to include people is super important. And then in terms of who needs to be HACCP certified or HACCP trained, the sky's the limit. You can get everybody in your facility HACCP trained if you would like to do that. Personally, I recommend that you start with everybody on your HACCP team being trained. So if you've got 5 people on your HACCP team, you would get all 5 of them trained, and then go beyond that. There have been courses that I have delivered, private courses that I have delivered, where I have trained 17 people, 24 people. And so companies are really expanding that training to make sure that in those departments beyond quality assurance, that there is a handful of people who have gone through training. So, somewhere between one and everyone. And it's just a matter of what your company can do.
No,
So
I like the sky's the limit.
Jumping in to build off Kathy's comments just real quick. So regulations mandate that you have minimum of 1, right? But best practice is redundancy, to Kathy's point. So it's really important that if something happens, somebody gets sick, somebody has to go out for a prolonged period of time, if you only have 1 person, you're very exposed, right? So to build on Kathy, having redundancy is very significant. And I love the comment that she said, as a best practice, anyone who's on your HACCP team being HACCP certified is a wonderful best practice to have. And then there are, we'll touch on it a little bit later, like we have our official certification course that we'll touch on that provides that credential for HACCP. But, we're also producing a refresher course that's just for that, right? That's significantly less time and just keeps you current like anything, we touched on reinforcement. So there's something in adult learning principles called the forgetting curve. It basically just says that we're all really, really forgetful as adults because we're overstimulated, and we have so it's in out one ear the other. The way that you combat that is reinforcement, right? So having a training program that provides reinforcement on HACCP and food safety protocols is just a must from that perspective. And then touching on the team concept that we were just on, the reason it's really important to have cross-function team members is from an internal auditing protocol. When you're doing best practice and you're internal auditing against your HACCP plans to make sure that you're compliant, you don't ever want your department head doing an internal audit of their own department. Reason being is that analogy about the fish and the water is absolutely applicable, but depending on culture and how your culture is, it can be at times very tempting for a department head to try to save face and not internally report things on themselves because they would be afraid that it would cost them their job or they would get in trouble. So it's really important that you have, when you're going through internal auditing protocols to support your HACCP program, that you have team members from other departments perform internal auditing activities external of their department so that you catch the things that you would otherwise miss by having eyes that are just accustomed to it, right? And you see past it. So really important. Seems simple, but again, it's why you start to hear culture, because again, you're not self-reporting, you're protecting lives. And I'm going to sound dramatic, but it's a thing. And there, to Kathy's point, coming from the food industry, a couple of years ago, and forgive me, a couple is relative. I have two toddlers under 4, so time is weird in my head. But there are cases in the food industry where senior executives have been prosecuted and sentenced to jail time for not addressing food safety seriously enough, and it costing the lives of people who consumed their food. Whether it be undisclosed allergens, as Kathy was mentioning, is a massive issue in food, and it being mislabeled. All of that's part of your HACCP program and protocols. And that in the food industry, the FDA, they will go after you if for negligence or, God forbid, it's intentional. There are significant consequences that exist now for this kind of thing. So it's like, again, touching on Kathy, of it's not a cost, it's a savings. Well, you personally, as the leader of your organization, can be held accountable in really significant ways. So it's, again, just a little build off what Kathy was touching on. I don't mean to be that guy sounding dramatic and scary, but again, this is, as Kathy was saying, food safety is not a solo journey. We are all incentivized to protect people. And it's not malice. It's 99.99% when these things go wrong and recalls. It's not malice. It's not done intentionally, right? But negligence and saying, I just didn't know, doesn't cut it anymore. You will be held accountable. So just, so with that, I'll turn it back over to you, sir.
No, it's something good to keep in mind. It's kind of hard to imagine somebody going to prison for these things, but it does happen. I mean, in worst case scenario,
there's precedents now.
Yeah, you don't want to be that person, to put it lightly. So, Kathy, I thought it could be kind of fun in a weird way, but do you have any examples maybe of like bad implementation of a HACCP plan, or a place that just was, without naming any names, obviously, but somebody who just was doing the wrong things and doing it a lot, and what that kind of looks like when somebody's got the wrong idea.
Yeah, and I usually get called in to help people develop programs. So other than publicly announced recalls, I don't have any specific example. But in terms of writing a HACCP plan, the kind of categories of people who have to do it include restaurants. So I don't know if it's all of California, but I have worked with restaurants in California where they had to write a HACCP plan. And at least one of them was using sous vide as a process, which is potentially hazardous and needs to be controlled. And so that was a case of a new restaurant opening. There was another client that was in the FDA category of very small business, and a very small business under FDA for the control of hazards in food is less than $1 million in annual revenue. And this client had surpassed that point of $1 million, and they were rapidly growing. And when a business goes from that category of very small business to small business, then they must have a HACCP plan in place. And so this company, they actually had 1 year to get it written and then implemented. And so I came along for the ride to support that. And when we think about the HACCP coordinator, when we think about quality assurance directors and managers, they are so busy. Everybody in industry, no matter what the industry is just so busy.
Mm-hmm.
And so going back to the resources and knowing what your resources are, learning that in your training is going to help you in the long run. So what I see in terms of writing HACCP plans is usually regulation driven. In the cannabis industry, Colorado is now coming on board, where Colorado is going to require a HACCP plan for cannabis infused edible manufacture. I don't know what date they settled on for enforcement, but I can say pretty confidently it's going to be within the next year. So we see a lot of companies that are going to want to get that done in terms of writing that HACCP plan. So not having a HACCP plan to going to a HACCP plan is mostly what I see with those types of companies. I was recently contacted by a foreign supplier of infant formula to review their HACCP plan. And when I opened up the document, all they had was their CCPs. They had like 3 CCPs. And with a HACCP plan, you have to go through every single step in your flow diagram and do a risk assessment. And so that was an example of going back to the company and saying, this isn't going to cut it. We have a lot more work that we have to do with that, as an example.
Kathy, can I jump in?
Yeah.
So the other thing that I will say with this is, and I feel like I'm a broken record, goes back to what we touched on earlier. Don't be afraid to rely on third-party consultants and experts to help you, especially the first time out of the gate, because there are a dozen different ways that you can write a HACCP plan for the same product, same process, same facility. And it's about how you operationally support your plan. Because once you say, this is our plan, if you deviate from that plan, you have to write yourself up for nonconformities. And what do I mean by this? So if you have a common example that an old consultant and friend of mine used to do all the time is if you have cold storage in your facility, one of the steps in your HACCP plan is verifying and validating the temperature of that cold storage to make sure it's within appropriate range, right? So if you write your food safety plan, that you're going to verify your temperature controls on that cold storage every morning at 8 a.m. and then you get stuck in traffic and you're not able to verify until 10 a.m., technically you have to write yourself up from a nonconformity. And it has to be documented in your process and as part of your internal protocols. And then when you get an actual certifying audit that comes through, you have to be able to show that documentation. Otherwise, you're not compliant with your food safety plan. all of that could be avoided by simply writing that step that I will verify our temperature controls on our cold storage once every 24 hours. So now, just that small tweak, you're still compliant, you're doing the exact same thing, but in a state like Colorado, God forbid there's a snowstorm and you get stuck on the highway and you can't get to your office by 8 a.m. to adjust, to verify temperature controls. You get there at 11, you're within your 24-hour allotment, no issue, right? And so that's where relying on some third-party expertise can be hugely beneficial, because they can bring that experience. Not that they're experts at your facility, but they're experts in the operational cadence. And so just that little change can save you a tremendous amount of pain and some in the future, just by having some context on the best way to write some of these steps that you need to take into consideration. So again, it's why folks like Kathy are amazing to be able to bring in to help with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not all experts, so you got to go to the people who are. Kathy, I thought if there's something like kind of tips maybe that you don't find in the books about HACCP, or things that things you've seen that you only get kind of learn if you've been out there and you see a lot of site visits and things. What are some sort of little tips or things people do right?
And this gets us back to the hazard analysis, the first step in writing that HACCP plan and implementing that HACCP plan. So after you have your preliminary steps done, one of those preliminary steps was your flow diagram. Then for each step on your flow diagram, you will do a risk assessment of those process steps. And again, shipping all the way through, or receiving all the way through shipping. And the other part of doing a hazard analysis is the hazard analysis of the ingredients. And so some companies, and I would say that these are relatively smaller companies, can do one document. So it's just a spreadsheet. I love working with spreadsheets. People who are QA-minded type people love working with spreadsheets. And what I do with my clients is we do two completely separate documents. So we'll do a document which is just the process steps. Most facilities will have one flow diagram, but however many flow diagrams you have, that's how many food safety plans or HACCP plans you have. And so if you just focus on one flow diagram, you do the risk assessment of every single step in one spreadsheet. And one of the reasons that I separate it that way is it's just a completely different mindset, because process steps versus ingredients, when you're thinking about your process steps, again, it's all within the four walls of your facility. You have a lot of control over that. You have a lot of history and understanding of the processing and the operations, the potential hazards. And so the mindset of going through that is one way. Then the company has to look at every single ingredient that comes in the door. And so with the hazard analysis of the ingredients, you are evaluating what hazards are associated with those ingredients. And that is going to be dependent on your supplier. It's dependent on every individual ingredient because they have different hazards associated with them. So we do two spreadsheets. With the ingredient spreadsheet, then what I do, which is very helpful for sorting, which is one of the fun things with spreadsheets, is I will include the supplier that the ingredient's coming from, the type of storage. Is it going to go into ambient, refrigerated, or frozen storage on site? And then what you're also doing in your mind is you're starting to visualize, where am I going to store these ingredients? So I'm offloading it off of the truck. I'm going to check it in. I'm going to transport it. I'm going to put it into storage. I also document the quantity, and that includes the packaging. So is it a 2,000-pound tote? Is it a drum, a bucket, a pallet of bags? What is the type of packaging? And that's reflective in the storage for those different ingredients as well. And then allergens. So what ingredients have allergens versus what ingredients don't have allergens? And that also becomes a pretty major spreadsheet when you start looking at all of that. But again, it leads into storage. So in my frozen storage, what ingredients do I have that don't have allergens? What ingredients do I have that do have allergens? And I need to separate those out. So it all folds in together eventually. And that's all part of the hazard analysis for me. And just as an aside, hazard analysis is a term that has two different meanings. And so it is the process, doing the risk assessment of all the steps, doing process steps, doing the risk assessment of all the ingredients. That's the process with your team. But then there's the final document. So that spreadsheet that you develop with your team, that also is just called the hazard analysis. And know that that hazard analysis, once you get to that point, and if you're in a facility where you're in the position of reviewing a hazard analysis, you put that kind of auditor mindset in. It's the big deal. When you get inspected, my expertise is more on the FDA side, so a little bit stronger on the FDA side there. If your FDA inspector comes in, just expect that FDA inspector or your state inspector is going to sit down and pore over that hazard analysis. The hazard analysis is the big deal. It starts all the control of hazards that are identified as critical control points versus GMPs. And really all of your food safety programs just develop from that hazard analysis. It's a big deal.
Hey, Kathy, jump in. We've got a question. Hey, Mark, good to see you out there. I hope life is treating you really well. He came across with, how does a company's HACCP plan interface or not with the company's EPCRA plan? So first, let's clarify the acronym that not everybody might be aware of. But the EPCRA is the Emergency Planning and Community Rights to Know Act that was passed. Mark, I'm gonna get this wrong. I want to say early 90s, late 80s is when that kind of came on the scene. So with that in mind, Kathy, any context of how your HACCP plan can be a part of that overall regulation?
Absolutely. So in 2019, under FDA, there was the enforcement of the food defense rule. And so what I have seen in hazard analysis, for example, with a process step, that the company will go through and do the evaluation of the biological, chemical, and physical hazard. So those are 3 rows in the spreadsheet, and then add an additional row there as your 4th row, which basically is a risk assessment. What are the potential hazards at this particular process step? And I'm thinking of food defense. And so food defense is kind of overlap with your emergency, crisis planning, that kind of thing, crisis management. And it can very nicely be done together. Absolutely.
Great answer. And again, for those that are new, death by acronym in this space is a real thing. And so again, it's the no egos, no stupid questions, and rely on experts that are here to help. Because again, as you start to get into the FDA world, I'm not sure I've met an organization that falls in love with acronyms more than our government. So it's, there's a bunch of them out there, and we're here to help with that. But there's a tremendous amount of experts out there as well.
So many acronyms.
That kind of stuff.
I do. I noticed our time, but I just want to jump in with one more kind of side to our discussion, and that which we haven't talked about yet, which is preliminary programs. So under HACCP, we would be designing GMPs for sanitation, supply chain, and then allergen management. So we have touched on allergen management. And one of the things that I really like about the Rootwurks curriculum that I worked with the staff on is the incorporation of that information as well. So we have the risk assessment of our process steps, which is the formal hazard analysis part, but don't forget about those allergen management programs, how the importance of sanitation and getting that master sanitation schedule and following that master sanitation schedule. All of that is under continuous improvement. When we were first talking about what is HACCP, I was imagining a 3-ring binder that just sits on the shelf, and that's not what HACCP is. HACCP is continuous improvement. It's a quality management program, and it should be constantly evolving as well as things change. And that's another reason why you need a multi-department or multifunctional team, because no one department is going to be aware of changes over time. And you need to incorporate those as appropriate for food safety.
Awesome. The 3-ring binder reminded me of something I wanted to ask you, Chase. So how important, and I know it's something that we do at Rootwurks, help people with, but how important is good record keeping and training people to keep good records, and ones that they can actually know where to find when they need them, just to show that you didn't just do stuff, you actually can prove it, you know?
Short answer, if it's not recorded, it didn't happen.
There you go.
So, I mean, it's that simple. Like, it just, I mean, I could elaborate on that with time, right? It's vital. And so centralized record keeping is monumental. Getting out of paper, you know, we joke, one of the things that we're so proud about is with our Rootwurks system is it provides that. You know, it's your one-stop shop, if you will. It starts with training, making sure people know, but then we give you a lot of reinforcement and record keeping and documentation tools along the way to get you out of paper, so that you can make things more visible, share things faster. Your program, right? Your plans, they're not static. They're a living, breathing. Well, you're not breathing, but they're a living thing. They evolve. And so having the tools in place that allow you to evolve your systems and your plans, and then cascading that necessary information and the training around those updates to your staff is really important. And if you're doing all that work, but you don't have it documented, you're in an internal audit and something happens, it never happened. So Ben, to answer your question, again, I sound like the dramatic one, but I don't know. There might not be a more important thing as an operator, right? Because, again, if everybody's doing everything perfect, not a big deal. But if someone makes a mistake and you don't have it, like all of the work that you've been doing, all the training you've been doing, all your internal audit records, your corrective action steps, where you've caught something before something went bad and you fix that, having that record keeping to where if you are unfortunately in a recall situation, you're dealing with a regulatory audit, if you can show them that and like, look, this is what we do. We train people here. There's checklists. We do routine internal audits. Here's our corrective action protocols. It creates closed loops of compliance with that reinforcement. So you verify, validate, then re-verify, validate. A recall can turn into a slight slap in the wrist versus potentially being shut down if it's due to negligence or gross negligence, God forbid. So, yeah, I guess I'm just going to lean into being that dramatic guy, but having organized, accessible record keeping is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought, well, before we head out of here, I thought maybe Chase, you could give anybody listening kind of a rundown of how we help out with all of these issues. We also have our HACCP course online, which is mentioned in there. But yeah, I just thought maybe you could run down some of these ways we can help people and steps people can take.
Yeah, so as far as resources out there, again, Rootwurks for any company. And so, you know, it starts with training. I'm can't tell you how thrilled I am to let this audience know that we have literally, as of today, have launched our official e-learning HACCP training course. It all starts with that. We, without question, are the most affordable, lowest priced, officially approved course in the world. And so if you're looking to get started, our course is a wonderful place to start. We talked about third party, right? Bringing in consultants and expertise. And then we also, as we talk about culture, have a great tool that we'll share around food safety culture that gives you kind of a litmus of like, okay, where are we today, right? And as we talk about food culture awareness training is something that is becoming more of a thing. It's a great resource. It's free. There's no cost associated with it. You just have to register, access it, complete it, and then we give you a downloadable corrective action plan based on where you fall of best practice steps on what you can do to kind of improve. So first and foremost, that and I'm very biased with Rootwurks, but we by no means are the only ones out there with these resources. There's a lot of tools out there to help you with this journey.
That's great. Hey, Kathy, if somebody wants to learn more about your consulting services for HACCP, food safety, where can they head to?
Definitely LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn. It's Kathy Knutson, PhD, for my profile.
Awesome. Yeah, no better expert to check out than there. And I think next,
jumping in on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Real quick, Ben. We'll after we follow up with this, there'll be an opportunity if you're interested. Kathy and we work very closely together. At the end of this webinar, you'll have an opportunity. If you're interested in learning ways that Rootwurks and ourselves and Kathy can help you with this journey, you can let us know, and we can schedule some follow-up time to learn a little bit more about your operation and talk about ways that we can help in that journey, as well as starting with our training course, which we'll provide links to after the follow-up of this. Speak of the devil, here we go. And so again, I'm super proud of this course. Mm-hmm. It's one of it. Like I said, I'm very biased, but as far as bang for your buck, there's not a better opportunity in the market, and it will give you a great foundation for what you need to kind of start this journey. And with the cool part, to Kathy's earlier point, starting this journey is not a cost; it's a way to expand your business, right? Because the more you get here, it becomes part of your marketing protocols, and you can ensure people that you're building safe products, which, coming out of the food industry is vital, but in the cannabis industry, equally vital, right? Mm-hmm. Establishing consistency with your brand, your experience for your customers, that all falls out of having programs like HACCP in place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Well, before we duck out, just I guess to run over some of the takeaways we got here. Definitely that you want to see it not as a cost, but more that you're saving money. There's also the fact that, these things can, may sound dramatic, but they can actually, cost people's, health and well-being and even lives in some cases. HACCP is essential for mitigating these risks. Management must play a central role, key role in making it all happen. And, it all starts at the top. And then it's just got to keep repeating the training and keep records of everything you do, or else it might as well not have happened. And then once you do have HACCP in place, that can be a major role in having a food safety culture, which is very important for any company out there. And that's it for this installment, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Check out the HACCP course on rootworks.com and go check out Kathy Knutson on LinkedIn. And thanks for being with us.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Kathy. Always a pleasure.
Have a good day.